Emily Harper thought she was living a safe and beautiful life with Daniel Harper in their perfect white house at the end of Maple Street. But behind the smiling photos and candlelit dinners, something dark was quietly growing. Daniel Harper appeared to be a devoted husband, calm, successful, respected by neighbors. But Emily's final diary entries would later reveal that the man she trusted most had become the source of her deepest fear. What looked like a tragic suicide on a cold October morning would slowly unravel into a chilling story of control, secrets, and a carefully planned nightmare hidden behind the image of a perfect marriage. The Harper house stood at the end of a peaceful suburban street, lined with maple trees and identical mailboxes. It was the kind of neighborhood where children rode bicycles in the evening and neighbors waved from freshly cut lawns. The house itself was bright white with soft blue shutters and a wide front porch decorated with seasonal flowers. Warm yellow lights glowed from the windows every night, giving it a welcoming and safe appearance. To anyone passing by, it looked like a place where nothing bad could ever happen. Inside lived Daniel Harper and his wife, Emily Harper. They had been married for 7 years. Daniel worked long hours as a financial consultant and often wore tailored suits that made him appear confident and successful. Emily ran a small online home decor shop from a carefully designed office space upstairs. Her social media pages showed perfectly arranged furniture, homemade candles, and smiling photos of her and Daniel holding hands during vacations. Their anniversary posts were filled with affectionate captions and heart emojis. Friends often commented that they were lucky to have found such a strong and loving marriage. Neighbors described them as quiet but polite. They attended barbecues, brought wine to dinner parties, and never seemed to argue in public. Even when Daniel's car returned late at night, the house remained peaceful and still. Then one cold October morning, everything changed. Daniel called emergency services shortly after sunrise. Emily was found lifeless in their bedroom, lying neatly on the bed as if she had simply fallen asleep. There were no broken objects, no overturned furniture, and no visible signs of violence. The bedroom curtains were half drawn, and the room looked calm and undisturbed. By the afternoon, police labeled it a tragic suicide. The perfect house, once admired by everyone, suddenly felt heavy with silence. 2 weeks after the funeral, the house no longer felt warm and welcoming. The flowers on the porch had begun to wilt, and unopened sympathy cards were stacked neatly on the hallway table. Daniel had returned to work, telling neighbors he needed distraction. The silence inside the house felt different now, less peaceful and more unsettling. Emily's younger sister, Claire, arrived one afternoon to collect a few personal belongings that Daniel said he could not bear to look at. Claire moved slowly through the rooms, noticing how carefully everything had been arranged. The framed photographs were still perfectly straight. Emily's office upstairs looked untouched, as if she might return at any moment to finish a project. Claire felt an uneasy tightness in her chest as she opened drawers and sorted through clothes. In the back of the master bedroom closet, hidden behind heavy winter coats, Claire noticed a small wooden box she had never seen before. It was simple but locked. The key was taped discreetly underneath the shelf above it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside lay a leather-bound diary. At first, the pages seemed ordinary. Emily had written about daily routines, decorating ideas, and plans for future holidays. There were lists of goals and notes about expanding her business. But as Claire continued reading, the tone shifted. The cheerful entries slowly gave way to short, anxious paragraphs. Emily wrote about feeling watched inside her own home. She described Daniel's growing need to control small details of her life. She mentioned that he checked her phone frequently and insisted on knowing her exact schedule. The later entries were darker. Emily wrote that she felt unsafe but did not know how to explain it to others. The final pages were filled with fear. Claire closed the diary, realizing that the official story no longer seemed complete. When investigators reopened the case, they began by carefully examining the image Daniel and Emily had presented to the world. On the surface, their marriage looked stable and successful. Their bank account showed steady income, regular mortgage payments, and frequent purchases that matched their comfortable lifestyle. But as detectives dug deeper into financial records, a different picture emerged. Daniel had been hiding significant debt. Over the past 2 years, he had invested large amounts of money into risky business ventures that quietly failed. Credit card balances had grown. There were private loans taken from unfamiliar lenders. Several payments were overdue. None of this had appeared on the joint accounts Emily managed for household expenses. Investigators discovered that Emily had recently updated her life insurance policy. The coverage had increased to $2 million just 8 months before her death. Daniel was listed as the sole beneficiary. The timing immediately raised suspicion. Friends later admitted that Emily had mentioned stress about money, but had never explained the full situation. Neighbors described hearing occasional arguments late at night, though nothing that seemed violent. A close friend revealed that Emily had been sleeping in the guest room for several weeks before her death. Their smiling vacation photos had been taken during a short trip meant to fix things. Detectives also inspected the home's security system. Cameras covered the driveway, the backyard, and the front porch. Every entrance was monitored. Yet there were no cameras inside the bedroom hallway or master bedroom. Daniel had explained earlier that he valued privacy inside the home, but the absence of indoor footage created a blind spot on the very night Emily died. The perfect marriage that once impressed everyone was beginning to show deep cracks beneath its polished surface. The night Emily died was marked by a violent storm that swept through the neighborhood without warning. Thick clouds covered the sky before midnight, and heavy rain began to pour against the windows. Wind rattled the shutters of the Harper house, and flashes of lightning briefly illuminated the quiet street. Most neighbors stayed indoors, unaware that something far more troubling was unfolding just a few houses away. Daniel later told investigators that he had gone to sleep in the guest room after a tense evening. He claimed they had argued about finances and decided to spend the night apart. According to his statement, he woke shortly after 6 in the morning and went to check on Emily. He said he found her lying still in bed and immediately called emergency services. At first glance, the scene appeared calm. Emily was positioned neatly under the covers. A glass sat on her bedside table, along with a prescription bottle of sleeping pills. There were no broken objects, no signs of forced entry, and no visible struggle. The storm had knocked out power briefly during the night, causing security cameras outside to lose recording for nearly 40 minutes. That gap in footage drew attention once investigators reviewed the timeline. Phone records later revealed that Daniel had been awake at 2:13 a.m., using his phone to search for information about the effects of combining alcohol with sedatives. The search history had not been cleared. Detectives also noticed that the glass on the bedside table had no fingerprints, not even Emily's. It appeared to have been carefully wiped clean. The storm may have washed away any evidence outside, but inside the bedroom, subtle inconsistencies began to suggest that the night had not been as simple as it first seemed. As investigators continued building their case, they turned their attention to the people closest to the couple. Emily's best friend, Sarah Collins, had known her since college. She had attended holidays at the Harper house and appeared in many of their social media photos. At first, Sarah described the marriage as normal, though she admitted that Emily had seemed distant in recent months. Detectives noticed that Sarah appeared anxious during questioning, often pausing before answering simple questions. A deeper look into phone records revealed frequent contact between Sarah and Daniel. Their calls often lasted late into the night, sometimes over an hour. The pattern intensified during the final 6 weeks before Emily's death. Investigators also recovered deleted messages from a shared cloud backup. The messages suggested a growing emotional connection between the two. While there was no direct mention of harming Emily, the tone revealed secrecy and closeness that went far beyond casual friendship. Emily's diary included a troubling detail. In several entries, she referred to the woman in the shadows. She wrote about sensing that Daniel's attention had shifted elsewhere. She described noticing changes in his routine, unexplained absences, and private phone calls taken outside the house. Although she never mentioned Sarah by name, The timeline matched the increased communication between Sarah and Daniel. Detectives began to consider whether the affair had created pressure inside the marriage. If Emily had discovered the relationship, a divorce could have exposed Daniel's financial struggles and prevented him from receiving the life insurance payout. The possibility of losing both money and reputation may have raised the stakes. What once seemed like a simple friendship now looked like a hidden layer in a far more complicated story. As the investigation moved forward, prosecutors ordered a second, more detailed toxicology review. The original report had concluded that Emily died from a lethal combination of prescription sleeping medication and alcohol. At the time, it supported the theory of suicide. But with new suspicions surrounding the case, experts decided to re-examine the results more closely. The updated analysis revealed something troubling. The concentration of sleeping medication in Emily's bloodstream was far beyond what doctors typically see in voluntary overdoses. Medical specialists explained that such a high level would likely cause extreme drowsiness, confusion, and loss of coordination within minutes. It would have been difficult for her to measure additional pills or pour herself alcohol once the first dose began affecting her body. Another detail raised concern. Traces of the medication were found partially dissolved in her stomach, suggesting it may have been administered in liquid form before she consumed the alcohol found in her system. Investigators also reviewed photographs taken at the scene and noticed faint bruises along her upper arms. They were subtle and had originally been dismissed as minor marks. However, when examined in context, they appeared consistent with someone being held firmly. Medical experts concluded that Emily may have been unconscious before the alcohol entered her bloodstream. This detail shifted the case dramatically. If she had already lost awareness, she could not have willingly consumed the deadly mixture. The new findings forced authorities to officially reclassify the case as suspicious. What had once been labeled a tragic self-inflicted death now pointed toward deliberate planning. The scientific evidence did not rely on emotions or assumptions. It quietly contradicted the original story and suggested that Emily's final hours were not under her control. The final pages of Emily's diary became the most important evidence in the investigation. Detectives handled the small leather book carefully, treating it as both a personal record and a possible warning left behind. The last entry was dated the day before her death. Unlike the earlier pages, the handwriting appeared rushed and uneven, as if written under stress. The ink pressed deeply into the paper, leaving faint marks on the next page. In that final entry, Emily described a growing sense of danger inside her own home. She wrote that Daniel had been distant for months, but recently seemed unusually calm, almost rehearsed in his kindness. She noted how he spoke about fresh starts and new opportunities, words that felt unsettling rather than hopeful. She mentioned feeling isolated from friends and unsure who to trust. One line stood out to investigators. Emily wrote that she had started feeling dizzy in the evenings after drinking tea Daniel prepared for her. She described sudden waves of exhaustion that did not feel natural. She wrote that her thoughts became cloudy and that she struggled to stay awake. She had considered seeing a doctor, but feared being dismissed as anxious or paranoid. The final sentences were chilling. Emily wrote that if something happened to her, it would not be an accident. She believed her life was in danger, but did not know how to prove it. The entry ended abruptly, without a signature or closing remark. For detectives, the diary was no longer just a collection of fears. It read like a silent testimony. Within weeks of reviewing that final entry alongside the toxicology findings, authorities moved forward with an arrest warrant for Daniel Harper. The arrest of Daniel Harper sent shockwaves through the quiet neighborhood. News vans lined the street that once seemed so peaceful. Reporters stood in front of the White House with blue shutters, describing the dramatic shift from a tragic suicide to a suspected murder. Neighbors who had once praised the couple now avoided cameras, unsettled by how easily they had believed the illusion. During the trial, prosecutors carefully built a timeline. They presented financial records showing Daniel's mounting debt and the recent increase in Emily's life insurance policy. They introduced phone data that placed him awake during the early hours of the storm, searching for information about sedatives and alcohol. The toxicology experts explained how the level of medication in Emily's body made self-administration unlikely. Photographs of the faint bruises were displayed to the jury, reinforcing the medical testimony. The diary became the emotional center of the case. Each entry was read aloud in court, outlining Emily's growing fear and isolation. The final page, written just hours before her death, left a lasting impression. It suggested planning, manipulation, and a slow build towards something irreversible. The defense argued that the diary reflected anxiety and misunderstanding. They claimed the financial issues were temporary and unrelated. But the combination of scientific evidence, digital records, and Emily's written words formed a consistent pattern that was difficult to dismiss. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder. Daniel showed little reaction as the sentence was read. The house was later sold to new owners, but its reputation never fully recovered. Emily's diary was eventually released as part of public court records. What had once been hidden in a closet became the key to exposing a carefully constructed lie.